Alright, I hope you are enjoying your learning so far in this course. Again, I should just point out right now, I know you must be thinking, Kush, there's so much of theory going on. When is the practical stuff coming? Don't worry. Like I mentioned before, that's how this course is structured, because trust me, this is the correct way to learn landscape photography. You don't want to go out in the field and then just suddenly figure everything out. We will have that aspect, the practical aspect, also coming up in this course. Okay, in fact, obviously that is going to be the most important one. But right now, let's move on to the next principle, which is don't worry about too many rules of composition. Okay, there are two main rules that you have to remember, which I call rule of thirds and leading lines, which I'm just going to talk about quickly in this particular video, because otherwise, if you start researching this on your own, landscape photographers have this habit of creating unnecessary rules, in my opinion. Let me show you what I mean. So if you were to go to Google and just type landscape photography composition rules or principles, you'll start seeing these weird diagrams with, like for example, this thing here is called as the golden ratio, very popular. I never was a big fan of it, okay? It kind of, tells you how to place some objects in your landscape shot. Then you have like, weird puzzle looking like diagrams like this. And then sometimes I just feel that a lot of these photographers get a shot which looks good and then they draw these things. It's like done afterwards, okay, that I did this and I did that. And for me, it's like, like what I like to say is that, we just went through, or rather even going through the whole COVID thing. It's a very bad thing. But one of the very good terms that came out of all this was the term called essential, okay? That what is essential and what is non-essential. And I like to teach photography in such a way where I only like to teach something which is essential and really makes a lot of difference. Okay, so the two rules that I talked about are basically rule of thirds and leading lines. And I feel, yes, if you just know these two, that's more than enough. So let's quickly see some examples of this. So first of all, let's see the rule of thirds, which basically means that, when you have this grid and you can activate this grid on your camera, like we've discussed before, if you have a focal point in your landscape, and by a focal point, I mean something which kind of stands out in a landscape shot, it can be like a hut, like a tree, something in the foreground, then usually it's a good idea to follow rule of thirds, which just means that you place that focal point, okay, anywhere where these lines intersect. That's the whole point of rule of thirds. Okay, this just doesn't apply in landscape photography, applies to all genres of photography whenever you use rule of thirds, that you place something on these intersection points. Basically, this is where you'll be focusing on this particular part, or at least just place it somewhere near to these intersection lines or along the line. Doesn't really have to be too perfect, okay? So this, yes, it does make a difference, because rule of thirds is just a proven rule. It's used in video making, photography, everywhere. Just studies have shown that it looks pleasing to the eye when the main subject is, there's on this one side you have a bit of room, and on the other side you have got a lot of room. It just is something that looks good to our eye. A lot of tests have been done for this, and I follow this a lot. So anytime I have a shot in which, let's say, I have got a focal point like a hut, then I like to use rule of thirds, something that is going to stand out. Like for example here, in the foreground element also, I just placed these rocks. I kept this Buddha figure on top, and you can see even the sunset, everything I aligned in the format of rule of thirds, okay? So you can see here it's on the side, and just kind of balances out also sometimes the composition, because you have some aspects here, and then, we have the rocks on the left. So if you were to think of your landscape shot as a weighing scale, okay, think sometimes using rule of thirds can also, you can use it to balance things out. Maybe you're finding there's too much of stuff this side, but this side was too empty. Maybe you can put something or try to get a scene in which there is a strong focal point on the other side. But right now, don't worry about all that. Mainly, if you have a strong focal point, try to use rule of thirds. For example, in this shot, you can see I've used this. I probably would have liked to just have a bit of more space here, but the area where I was taking this shot, it's a long exposure shot, and it's actually a composite, because I blurred the water with one shot and I took another shot for the birds, okay? And I combined both of them in Photoshop. We'll be talking about all this when we go inside Photoshop later on. But here, the main point is this Gateway of India, which is a pretty popular monument in Mumbai. So it's almost, I've got it in the rule of thirds. So again, I'll be very honest with you, I don't really use those grids a lot. Like, I don't even activate in my camera, because when we're going to go on the field, you'll see that we have so many things to do that just following everything absolutely like a robot is not possible. Okay, but what it means is, yes, place it on one side. Okay, that's how you have to remember things. So do that now. This is different. We saw the shot before of the Auckland Harbour Bridge. A lot of times I like to use this composition where this is kind of an exception to rule of thirds, where we get what we call as a central or a symmetrical composition where both the sides are kind of balanced. Okay, so I had these series of boats on the Auckland Harbour, and and that's usually the case in harbors. You'll find these lines of boats, and I had one here, and this was coming in the center. Then it's fine to break rule of thirds and put your focal point in the center if you find the left and right are at least a bit symmetrical. You've got some sort of symmetry that is going on, okay? But otherwise, even when I shoot skylines like we saw this shot before, if there's the tallest building, like some building that stands out a lot, I like to use rule of thirds on that. Like for example, on the Sky Tower here, I have used that, okay? And then even in this lighthouse picture that we saw, now you'll be able to see that yes, this has been placed, and this time I actually did use a grid for this because I absolutely wanted this composition on the top intersection point, the top left intersection point of that grid, okay? So this was absolutely aligned properly with rule of thirds. And sometimes you can even just use the sunset, okay, as in the rule of thirds. Very, very popular technique. So just arrange your framing on composition in such a way that the sunset or the sunrise comes where those, in that axis at least, or just on one side, okay? Now let's also see one more important composition rule. So another important composition rule which definitely is essential is, whenever you can find it, is the leading lines composition. I'm sure if you are into photography, you must have heard of it. Very, very popular amongst landscape photographers. It's a technique of composition where lines are used to draw attention of the viewer towards the subject in the photo. Like you can see here, the tracks behind. This type of composition paves an easy path for the eye to follow. So basically, leading lines kind of leads. There are some lines in the shot. I'm going to be showing you a lot of examples, which is kind of go farther in from the foreground all the way to the background and kind of give this area, rather effect that it's disappeared into the infinity. So the lines start out really broad in the foreground, and as the perspective narrows down towards the background, they become kind of invisible towards the infinity side. It really makes for very beautiful shots. So let's just see some examples which have been mentioned here, like tracks, piers, and all these things. So piers are like very, very popular for this. Okay, anytime you have this bridge sort of structures, they are going to give you this thing where it just narrows down from the foreground, and these are called as leading lines. Okay, so you can see roads, of course, are very, very popular for this. Even curvy roads, doesn't matter, but the point is, give that infinity look, okay? It should have that perspective effect. That's when it really looks good, okay? Not just it's straight. Try to get the ending is very important. Try to just, get it in such a way that it just disappears. Like you can't really see the end of it, okay? Sometimes it can even be used not just for objects like we've been seeing, but even light itself can create leading lines, okay? But for this, you really have to have a good eye for it. But things like these hanging bridges and all these things will give you that effect. And of course, railway tracks are perhaps one of the most popularly clicked ones. And always, as a photography instructor, if I do mention railway tracks, it's my duty to tell you, if you plan to do this, please be very, very careful about your surroundings, okay? So these were leading lines and rule of thirds. I think these two are enough for a beginner. So this was just a short video. We'll now be discussing about some important principles also regarding some of the gear that we haven't talked about. We'll handle that in the next video. I'll see you there.